On March 6, year 2020, investigators in Blountville, Tennessee, tore open a rotting wooden shed and found a trash bag wrapped in aluminum foil. Inside lay the skeletal remains of 15-month-old Evelyn Mae Boswell, missing for 2.5 months, while her 19-year-old mother told lie after lie. But Megan Boswell is just one name on a chilling list. Tonight, we're diving into 10 cases of teenage girls who didn't just kill, they concealed, they manipulated, and in some instances, they showed no remorse. What drives a teenager to take a life? And what happens when the justice system confronts evil wrapped in youth? Before we dive into these 10 shocking cases, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how global our true crime family is. Case 1. Megan Boswell, year 2020. On a cold morning in March, year 2020, a team of Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents returned to a modest family property on Muddy Creek Road in Blountville, Sullivan County. They had been there before searching sheds, barns, crawl spaces. This time, they carried a new search warrant and a grim certainty. At the edge of the property sat a small wooden shed, paint peeling, door sagging on rusted hinges. Inside, wedged between broken lawn chairs and oil cans, they found a black garbage bag. It was sealed tight, heavy, and stiff with time. When they slit the plastic, the smell hit first. Then came the layers: sheet plastic, then aluminum foil, wrapped with a precision that told investigators this wasn't panic. This was concealment. Inside those layers lay the skeletal remains of Evelyn Mae Boswell, a 15-month-old toddler who had been the subject of a statewide Amber Alert for nearly 3 weeks. The state had mobilized search parties, broadcast her face on every highway billboard from Knoxville to Kingsport, and questioned dozens of witnesses. And all that time, Evelyn had been right here, hidden in a shed, on her own family's property, wrapped like evidence. Forgotten by the one person who should have protected her. That person was her mother, 19-year-old Megan Boswell. And the story of how Evelyn ended up in that shed is a case study in lies, neglect, and a young mother who chose concealment over a single honest phone call. Sullivan County sits in Tennessee's northeastern corner, a patchwork of rolling farmland and quiet residential roads where neighbors still greet each other by name. Muddy Creek Road was one of those dead-end streets where everyone knew everyone until Megan Boswell moved back home. Megan's childhood had been fractured from the start. Her parents separated when she was a toddler, and her mother, Angela Boswell, took custody. The family struggled financially. Court records and Department of Children's Services files paint a picture of instability. Megan had been the focus of at least 2 referrals for neglect. Once in year 2016, after a report of extended unsupervised play. Once in year 2018, when neighbors found a child wandering alone at night. Both times, DCS issued warnings, but took no formal action. By year 2019, Megan was 18, pregnant, and living with her mother rent-free in exchange for helping with household chores and childcare. But tensions ran high. Court exhibits revealed text messages from January year 2020. Angela writing, "Megan, you promised to pay rent, and you never do. You think you can just take Evelyn and disappear." Megan, overwhelmed and resentful, confided to friends that caring for a toddler on her own felt impossible. Yet none of these warning signs, not the DCS referrals, not the financial strain, not the family conflict prepared anyone for what was coming. Evelyn Mae Boswell was born on September 10, year 2018. Pediatric records from a Johnson City clinic describe her as a happy baby who met developmental milestones on schedule: first words by 10 months, cruising furniture by 11. But a visit in November year 2019 flagged a severe diaper rash and weight plateau. The clinician recommended better hygiene and dietary adjustments. No one followed up. Megan's social media accounts from late year 2019 show scattered selfies with a smiling baby. One post from December 5 features 2 plastic water bottles by the couch, the everyday clutter of motherhood. Another from mid-December shows a wrapped Christmas present with the caption, "Evelyn's Christmas surprise." But beneath the festive veneer, stress was mounting. Private messages quote Megan saying, "I don't know how I'll manage if I lose my job." Evelyn's father, whom Megan had never married, was largely absent. In a February 2020 DCS interview, he admitted he hadn't seen his daughter in 6 months. The last confirmed sighting of Evelyn alive dates to December 26, 2019. A neighbor glimpsed Megan pushing the toddler on a backyard swing set. That same morning, Angela Boswell stopped by unexpectedly. Surveillance video from the property's front door shows the two women talking at length. Megan with arms folded, Evelyn strapped to her hip. Angela left without Evelyn. And then, silence. For 7 weeks, Evelyn May Boswell existed only in absence. Family texts went unanswered. Phone calls rolled into voicemail. A babysitter who normally kept Wednesday afternoons open wrote, "I knocked and Mom said she was out. I thought she meant groceries." School buses rumbled past the property, but no Boswell children boarded. None were of school age yet. Weeks became months, and no one reported Evelyn missing. On February 18, 2020, Evelyn's great-grandfather, Tommy Boswell Sr., finally filed a missing persons report with the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office. He told deputies he'd been worried but hoped the silence meant Megan wanted privacy while sorting family issues. The next day, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation issued an Amber Alert. Evelyn's face appeared on every media outlet in the state: blonde hair, blue-gray eyes, last seen in a pink onesie. Digital billboards flashed her photo on highways. Radio DJs paused songs to read her description. The community mobilized. Volunteers marched through muddy creek beds, scanned abandoned barns, checked roadside culverts. Posters went up in grocery stores and laundromats. Tips poured in some credible, many false leads. A Knox County sighting turned out to be a daycare toddler. A Hicksboro resident called 911 to report a girl matching Evelyn's description peering out a window. Deputies arrived to find nothing but a neighborhood dog. Each time an alert flashed on someone's phone, hearts skipped. Tennessee had not launched such a high-profile search for a missing toddler in years. Behind the scenes, investigators interviewed everyone connected to the Boswell household: Angela, Megan's father, babysitters, co-workers, childhood friends. On February 25, 2020, Angela Boswell and her boyfriend, William McLeod, were arrested in North Carolina for driving a vehicle reported stolen from the Boswell property. They were released without charges related to Evelyn's disappearance, but the episode underscored a trail that stretched well beyond Sullivan County. That same day, Megan herself was arrested for false reporting. Bond was set at $25,000. She was briefly jailed, released on conditions barring travel and requiring weekly check-ins. But Evelyn was still missing, and that's when the lies began to unravel. Investigators confronted Megan with inconsistencies. In one recorded interview, she claimed a church friend had taken Evelyn to a holiday meal in Johnson City on January 10, 2020. That friend, a local youth group leader, told detectives no such event occurred. In another session, Megan alleged she'd given Evelyn to her father for a 2-month visit. He, in turn, asserted he hadn't been allowed to see his daughter since Thanksgiving. Sheriff Jeff Cassidy later remarked to the press, "Every time we talk to her, her story changes." The TBI arranged a polygraph examination. Megan refused, citing pregnancy. Investigators checked her medical records. There was no record of prenatal care at the local clinic after December 2019. During a third interview, Megan was shown a family calendar with dates circled for holiday visits. Confronted with the physical evidence of her lies, she broke down and admitted Evelyn had not left the property since Christmas. That confession led detectives back to Muddy Creek Road, and on March 6, 2020, they found what they'd been searching for. The state medical examiner, Dr. Louise Chen, described the remains in her March 12, 2020 report. No identifiable soft tissue remained. Multiple rib fractures were consistent with concealment in a compact space. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, though the exact mechanism, smothering, strangulation, or obstruction, could not be confirmed due to decomposition. But one detail stood out: the aluminum foil. It had been wrapped in a deliberate, methodical manner, designed to minimize odor. Few toddlers are wrapped so meticulously. This wasn't the act of a panicked teenager stumbling upon a tragedy. This was concealment with intent. Investigators collected the foil, the plastic sheeting, zip ties, and the garbage bag itself as evidence. At the forensic lab, Megan's fingerprints matched prints found on the bag's exterior. Inside, scraps of a pink onesie, Evelyn's favorite, were found tangled in the remains. On August 10, 2020, the Sullivan County Grand Jury returned a 19-count indictment. The charges included 2 counts of felony murder, one for aggravated child abuse, another for aggravated child neglect, plus tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, failure to report a death, and false reporting. Prosecutors painted a portrait of deliberate deception. A mother who witnessed or caused her child's death, chose not to seek help, and hid the body while an entire state searched. Lead Assistant District Attorney Amber Massengill told jurors during opening statements. She told story after story for 2.5 months. And maybe the worst part is that she just went on with her life, as if Evelyn had never even existed. The defense countered with a narrative of panic and youth. Megan was 19 at the time of Evelyn's death, barely an adult herself. They argued no direct evidence proved she intended to kill her daughter. The cause, likely asphyxiation, could have been accidental. The concealment, they said, sprang from fear of losing her freedom and shame over an accidental death. But the forensic evidence was damning. The foil wrapping, the fingerprints, the lies that stretched across months, and the diary of a toddler's life reduced to silence. Megan Boswell's trial began in early February 2025 before Judge Carla Perkins. Witnesses included the TBI agent who first interviewed Megan, the neighbor who last saw Evelyn in December 2019, the medical examiner, and Angela Boswell, who delivered the most haunting testimony of the trial. Angela described how Megan never asked for help when Evelyn fell ill in January 2020. The prosecution closed by replaying Megan's recorded lies. "I gave Evelyn to my father. I thought she was with Grandma." Each statement was labeled demonstrably false. The defense called character witnesses church volunteers who remembered Megan's kindness and a child psychologist who spoke to the impulse to panic in young mothers. They urged jurors to see not malice, but a tragic failure of coping. Deliberations lasted just under 4 hours. The jury convicted Megan Boswell on all counts: first-degree felony murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated child neglect, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, failure to report a death, and false reporting. Sentencing occurred on February 27, 2025. Megan received life in prison with parole eligibility after 51 years, plus an additional 33 years for related counts. Judge Perkins spoke of a breach of sacred trust, noting the concealment signaled awareness and intent. "The law protects children more fiercely than any other class," the judge said, "and for good reason." As of 2025, Megan Boswell remains incarcerated at the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tennessee. Evelyn's name lives on in policy reviews. The Tennessee Department of Children's Services launched a task force in late 2025 to improve early warning systems for unreported childcare emergencies. The Sullivan County Sheriff's Office began offering free quarterly welfare checks for households with children under 3, combining wellness visits with parenting resources. Local churches raised funds for diaper drives and parenting hotlines. But the most poignant legacy remains in the questions that linger. Could one visit from DCS in January have altered Evelyn's fate? Could a single honest phone call to a neighbor, a hotline, a hospital, have brought her to safety instead of a shed? Evelyn Mae Boswell was 15 months old. She had bright eyes and laughter that filled rooms. She loved squeaky toys and bright rugs. And she was stolen from this world by the one person who should have protected her above all else. But Megan wasn't the first teenager to betray trust in the most unthinkable way. If you appreciate deep, well-researched, true crime content that respects victims while uncovering the truth, hit that subscribe button and press the bell icon. Your support keeps this channel going. Now, let's get into the next case. Case 2, Alyssa Bustamante, year 2009. On the evening of October 21, year 2009, 9-year-old Elizabeth Alton left her home in a quiet subdivision outside Jefferson City, Missouri, to walk the short distance to a friend's house. She never arrived. Her mother, Patty Price, called neighbors, retraced the route, and by nightfall contacted the Cole County Sheriff's Office. Within hours, search dogs were deployed. Volunteers combed wooded lots between homes. And just after midnight, the dogs stopped at a freshly disturbed patch of earth in a small forest behind the subdivision. Deputies began digging. What they uncovered was a shallow grave, and inside, the body of Elizabeth Alton, strangled and stabbed multiple times. The question wasn't just who had done this, it was who could have. Elizabeth was a child. She had been walking a route she'd taken dozens of times, and the grave had been dug with care, as if someone had prepared it in advance. Investigators began interviewing neighbors, family members, anyone who lived along that path. One name kept surfacing: Alyssa Bustamante, a 15-year-old girl who lived just a few houses down from the Alton family. Alyssa had babysat Elizabeth in the past. She knew her. She was familiar. And when deputies searched the woods more carefully, they found something chilling: a second grave, dug right next to the first, empty, waiting. Alyssa Bustamante's life had been marked by instability long before that October night. Born in year 1994, she was raised primarily by her grandparents in the small town of St. Martins, Missouri, after both of her parents struggled with drug addiction and legal troubles. Her father was in prison. Her mother was largely absent. Court records and psychiatric evaluations paint a picture of a teenager in crisis. Alyssa had a documented history of depression, self-harm, and suicidal ideation. She had been hospitalized multiple times for psychiatric treatment. Friends described her as withdrawn, dark, obsessed with death. Her online profiles featured morbid poetry and references to violence. Teachers noticed, but felt powerless. Mental health resources in rural Missouri were limited, and Alyssa's grandparents did their best with little support. But beneath the veneer of a troubled teen lay something more calculated. In the weeks leading up to October 21, year 2009, Alyssa had begun digging in the woods behind her home. She told a friend she was building hideouts. She posted cryptic messages online about wanting to know what it felt like to kill. And on that autumn afternoon, when Elizabeth Alton walked past her house, Alyssa saw an opportunity. Alyssa lured Elizabeth into the woods under the pretense of showing her something cool: a fort, a secret spot, something a 9-year-old would find irresistible. Once deep enough into the trees that no one could hear, Alyssa attacked. She strangled Elizabeth first, her hands around the child's throat, until she stopped struggling. But that wasn't enough. Alyssa then pulled out a knife and slit Elizabeth's throat. She stabbed her multiple times, even after the girl was clearly dead. Then, methodically, she dragged the body to one of the graves she had dug days earlier and covered it with dirt and leaves. Afterward, Alyssa walked home, cleaned herself up, and went about her evening as if nothing had happened. She attended a church event. She posted on social media, and then, alone in her room, she opened her diary and wrote an entry that would become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in American criminal history. I, just 5, killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel ATM. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the "oh my god, I can't do this" feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kinda nervous and shaky though right now. I gotta go to church now, lol. The casual tone, the misspelled amazing, the lol at the end. It wasn't the writing of someone in shock or panic. It was the writing of someone who had just satisfied a curiosity. When investigators interviewed Alyssa the next day, she initially denied involvement. But inconsistencies in her story, combined with physical evidence linking her to the scene, led to a more aggressive interrogation. Within hours, Alyssa confessed. She admitted luring Elizabeth into the woods. She admitted strangling and stabbing her. She admitted digging the graves in advance. And when asked why, she gave an answer that haunts investigators to this day. I wanted to know what it felt like. The Cole County Prosecutor's Office moved quickly. Alyssa was charged as an adult with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. Missouri law allowed for the death penalty in cases of premeditated murder, but the United States Supreme Court had ruled in Roper v. Simmons, a year 2005 case, that executing minors violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Alyssa was 15. The death penalty was off the table. But life in prison was not. Her defense team argued that Alyssa's psychiatric history, her depression, her medication changes, her unstable upbringing should mitigate her culpability. They brought in expert witnesses who testified to her mental illness, her lack of emotional regulation, her desperate need for treatment rather than punishment. But the prosecution had the diary. They had the premeditation, 2 graves dug in advance. They had the casual cruelty of the ahmazing entry. And they had a community in mourning for a 9-year-old girl whose only mistake was trusting a neighbor. In January year 2012, Alyssa Bustamante entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. The plea deal allowed her to avoid a trial and the possibility of life without parole. In exchange, she accepted a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. At the sentencing hearing, Elizabeth Alton's mother, Patty Price, delivered a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in tears. She described Elizabeth's love of animals, her bright smile, her dreams of becoming a teacher. "She was our baby," Patty said, voice breaking, "and she was taken from us by someone she trusted." Alyssa, seated at the defense table, showed little emotion. Some courtroom observers reported she appeared bored. Others said she looked dissociated, as if the weight of what she'd done still hadn't registered. Judge Patricia Joyce, before handing down the sentence, addressed Alyssa directly. "You will spend most, if not all, of your natural life in prison. And that is the consequence of your actions." As of year 2025, Alyssa Bustamante is incarcerated at the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Missouri. She is now in her early 30s. Her earliest possible parole date is year 2044. When she will be 50 years old. In the years since her conviction, Alyssa has reportedly participated in mental health treatment and educational programs within the prison system. Some reports suggest she has expressed remorse in private therapy sessions, though no public statements have been made. Victim advocacy groups continue to monitor her case, determined to ensure Elizabeth's memory is honored and that Alyssa serves the full measure of her sentence. Elizabeth Alton's family has never fully recovered. Her mother has spoken at victim advocacy events, pushing for stronger mental health interventions for at-risk youth and better monitoring of teenagers with violent ideation. A scholarship fund was established in Elizabeth's name, supporting young students pursuing teaching degrees, the dream Elizabeth never got to fulfill. Every October 21, the community of St. Martin's holds a memorial walk, retracing the path Elizabeth took that final evening. Participants carry candles and photos, a reminder that behind every crime statistic is a life cut short, a family left shattered. Alyssa Bustamante's case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How do we balance mental illness with accountability? At what point does a troubled childhood stop excusing monstrous actions? And how do we protect the innocent when warning signs are visible but resources are scarce? The diary entry, "It was ahmazing," remains one of the most haunting artifacts in modern true crime, a window into a mind that saw murder not as a tragedy, but as an experiment. Alyssa acted alone, but what happens when 2 teenage girls conspire together? Case 3. Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy, year 2012. On the night of July 6, year 2012, 16-year-old Skylar Neese climbed out of her bedroom window in Star City, West Virginia, and slipped into a waiting car. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex captured the moment. 12:30 a.m. Skylar, in shorts and a hoodie, walking toward a sedan idling in the parking lot. Inside were her 2 best friends, Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy. The 3 had been inseparable for years, sharing inside jokes, sleepovers, and social media posts, proclaiming their unbreakable bond. But that night, Rachel and Shelia weren't picking Skylar up for a joyride. They were taking her to a secluded spot in the Pennsylvania woods to kill her. 6 months later, in January year 2013, after one of the most intensive missing person searches in West Virginia history, authorities finally learned the truth. Skylar hadn't run away. She hadn't been abducted by a stranger. She had been murdered by the two people she trusted most. And the motive? Rachel Shoaf would later confess in a tearful interrogation. We didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Skylar niece, Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy grew up together in the tight-knit community of Star City, just outside Morgantown. They met in middle school and quickly became a trio attending football games, posting photos on Twitter, navigating the messy drama of teenage life. But by the summer of year 2012, cracks had formed. 3, as any teenager knows, is a volatile number. Alliances shift, secrets are kept, and in the case of Rachel and Shelia, a toxic resentment had begun to fester. Text messages recovered later would show the two girls complaining about Skylar, how she was annoying, how she didn't get the hint, how they wished she would just go away. But instead of distancing themselves, instead of simply ending the friendship like normal teenagers, Rachel and Shelia made a different choice. They decided to kill her. The plan was coldly methodical. Rachel and Shelia picked a date July 6, year 2012. They chose a location, a remote dirt road across the state line in Greene County, Pennsylvania, far enough from home that screams wouldn't carry. They agreed on a method: knives, because they were quiet and required no firearms or explosives that could be traced. And they agreed on a signal. When they reached the spot, they would count to 3. On 3, they would both attack simultaneously, ensuring neither could back out. That night, Skylar had no idea. She climbed into the back seat, excited for what she thought was a late-night adventure. The 3 girls drove for about 30 minutes, crossing into Pennsylvania, windows down, music playing. When they reached the isolated spot, Rachel and Shelia suggested they get out and smoke. Skylar agreed. They walked a short distance from the car, into the trees, far enough that the road disappeared from view, and then Rachel and Shelia pulled out kitchen knives they'd hidden in their waistbands. On 3, one of them whispered, 1, 2, 3. They attacked. Rachel later testified that Skylar's last words were, "Why?" She didn't understand. She didn't have time to. Rachel and Shelia stabbed her repeatedly, over and over, frenzied and desperate to finish what they'd started. When Skylar finally stopped moving, the 2 girls stood over her body, covered in blood, breathing hard. Then they dragged her deeper into the woods, covered her with branches and debris, and drove home. They stopped at a gas station to clean the blood off their hands and change clothes. They posted on Twitter, and they went to sleep. When Skylar was reported missing the next morning by her parents, Rachel and Shelia were among the first to offer help. They joined search parties. They posted tearful messages on social media, "Come home, Sky, we miss you so much." They gave interviews to local news stations, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. They hugged Skylar's mother and promised they'd do anything to help find her. And all the while, they knew exactly where Skylar was. For 6 months, the investigation went nowhere. Authorities followed hundreds of leads, reported sightings, rumored drug connections, theories about abduction. Skylar's parents, Dave and Mary Neese, grew increasingly desperate. They printed flyers. They appeared on television. They begged for answers. And Rachel and Shelia kept up the charade, attending vigils, laying flowers at memorials, maintaining the performance of grief. But by December year 2012, the weight of the secret was breaking Rachel Shoaf. She began experiencing panic attacks. She stopped eating. Friends noticed she seemed haunted. And on January 3, year 2013, during a routine follow-up interview with police, Rachel finally cracked. She asked to speak to her attorney. Then, in a recorded confession that would later be played in court, she admitted everything. The plan, the drive, the counting to 3, the stabbing, the cover-up. And when asked why, she gave the answer that would shock the nation. We just didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Rachel led investigators to the site in Pennsylvania. On January 16, 2013, a recovery team found Skylar's remains exactly where Rachel said they would be: skeletal, partially decomposed, still wearing the hoodie she'd climbed out her window in 6 months earlier. Forensic analysis confirmed cause of death: multiple stab wounds. Shelia Eddy was arrested the next day. She maintained her innocence at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Rachel's confession, cell phone records placing both girls at the scene, traces of Skylar's blood found in the trunk of Shelia's car. By May 2013, Rachel Shoaf entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15. Shelia Eddy held out longer, but in January 2014, she too pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. She received life in prison with eligibility for parole after 15 years. At her sentencing hearing, Skylar's father, Dave Neese, addressed both girls directly. "You were supposed to be her friends," he said, voice thick with anger and grief. "She trusted you, she loved you, and you killed her because you didn't want to be her friend anymore? What kind of monsters are you?" As of 2025, both Rachel Shoaf and Shelia Eddy remain incarcerated in West Virginia. Rachel is serving her sentence at LLING Correctional Center. Shelia is at the West Virginia State Penitentiary. Neither has been granted parole. Skylar's parents have attended every parole hearing, determined to ensure their daughter's killers serve every possible day behind bars. The case led to significant legislative change. In 2013, West Virginia passed Skylar's Law, which reformed the state's Amber Alert system to respond more quickly to missing children, even when there's no evidence of abduction. Previously, cases like Skylar's, where a teenager appeared to have left voluntarily, didn't trigger immediate alerts. Skylar's Law ensures that all missing children, regardless of circumstances, receive urgent attention. But no law, no sentence, no amount of justice can bring Skylar Neese back. She was 16 years old. She loved animals. She wanted to study forensics. She posted silly videos online and argued with her parents about curfew. She was, in every way, a normal teenager whose only mistake was trusting the wrong people. And on a July night in 2012, she climbed out her window, thinking she was going on an adventure with her best friends. Instead, she was walking toward her own execution. What kind of friendship ends in a premeditated execution? What time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious how many of you are watching late at night like me. If you've made it this far and these cases are as gripping to you as they are haunting, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button. It genuinely helps the algorithm push this video to more people who appreciate thorough true crime coverage. Let's keep going. Case 4. Jasmine Richardson, 2006. On the morning of April 23, 2006, police in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada, received a frantic call from a neighbor concerned about the Richardson family. No one had seen them in over a day. Cars were still in the driveway. Lights were on, but no one answered the door. When officers forced entry into the modest 2-story home, they found a scene of unspeakable horror. In the master bedroom lay Mark Richardson, age 42, stabbed multiple times. In the basement, his wife Deborah, age 48, had been viciously attacked, her throat slashed. And in a small upstairs bedroom, 8-year-old Jacob Richardson lay dead, stabbed in his bed. The house was soaked in blood, and the couple's 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine, was missing. Initially, authorities feared Jasmine had been abducted or was in grave danger. An Amber Alert was issued across Alberta. Search teams fanned out. Media coverage was wall-to-wall. But less than 24 hours later, police located Jasmine alive and unharmed in a small town over 100 miles away. She was with her 23-year-old boyfriend, Jeremy Steinke. And when investigators interviewed the couple, the truth emerged. Jasmine hadn't been abducted. She had helped plan and carry out the murders of her entire family. Jasmine Richardson had grown up in a stable, middle-class household in Medicine Hat. Her parents were protective, some might say, overprotective. Mark worked in the oil industry. Deborah was a stay-at-home mother who homeschooled the children for several years before enrolling them in public school. By all outward appearances, the Richardsons were an ordinary, loving family. But in year 2005, when Jasmine entered 6th grade, everything began to change. Jasmine became fascinated with goth culture, the music, the fashion, the dark aesthetic. She started wearing heavy eyeliner, black clothing, and posting brooding poetry online. Her parents worried but tried to be understanding. Then, in early year 2006, Jasmine met Jeremy Steinke at a local punk rock concert. Steinke was 23 years old, a high school dropout who worked occasional odd jobs and lived with friends. He was heavily into the goth and vampire subculture, often claiming online that he was a 300-year-old werewolf. He and 12-year-old Jasmine began a relationship that was illegal under Canadian law and deeply alarming to Jasmine's parents. When Mark and Deborah discovered the relationship, they forbade Jasmine from seeing Steinke. They grounded her. They monitored her online activity. They tried to end the contact. But Jasmine, like so many teenagers who feel their autonomy is threatened, rebelled. She and Steinke communicated in secret through email and instant messaging. And in those messages, the relationship took a dark turn. Steinke wrote, "I love you more than anyone could ever love anyone. I'd do anything for you." Jasmine responded, "Would you kill for me?" And Steinke, eager to prove his devotion, said yes. Over the course of several weeks in March and April year 2006, Jasmine and Jeremy planned the murders. They discussed methods. Knives would be quieter than guns. They discussed timing late at night when everyone was asleep. And they discussed their future. Once her family was gone, they could run away together and start a new life. Jasmine later told investigators she felt her parents were controlling and that killing them was the only way to be free. On the night of April 22, year 2006, Jeremy Steinke entered the Richardson home through the basement. Jasmine had unlocked the door. He went upstairs first, attacking Mark Richardson in the master bedroom. Mark fought back, but Steinke overpowered him, stabbing him repeatedly. Deborah Richardson was next. She was killed in the basement, her throat slit with such force that she nearly decapitated. The violence was extreme, frenzied, almost ritualistic. And then came Jacob. The 8-year-old boy woke up during the commotion. He saw his parents' blood. He saw Jeremy Steinke, a stranger in his home, and according to Jasmine's later testimony, it was Jasmine herself who killed her younger brother. She took the knife from Steinke and stabbed Jacob multiple times in his chest, ensuring he wouldn't survive to identify them. Afterward, Jasmine and Jeremy fled. They drove to a friend's trailer, cleaned themselves up, and then headed to a nearby town where they planned to disappear. For nearly a full day, they believed they'd gotten away with it. They posted online about their love. They talked about their future, and then police arrived. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Canadian history. Jasmine Richardson became the youngest person in Canada ever convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder. Jeremy Steinke was tried separately and also convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Jasmine, because she was only 12 at the time of the murders, was tried under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. She was found guilty on all 3 counts, but sentenced as a minor 10 years, the maximum under Canadian youth law, to be served in a psychiatric treatment facility followed by community supervision. The verdict sparked intense debate. Victim advocacy groups argued that someone capable of murdering her entire family, including an 8-year-old brother, should never walk free. But child welfare experts pointed to Jasmine's age, her psychological vulnerability, and the grooming influence of an adult man as mitigating factors. The court sided with rehabilitation over retribution. As of year 2016, after serving the full 10-year sentence, Jasmine Richardson was released into the community under a new identity. She is now an adult, living somewhere in Canada, her whereabouts protected by court order. She has completed psychological treatment, obtained her high school equivalency, and according to reports, expressed remorse for her actions. But to the extended Richardson family, Mark's siblings, Deborah's parents, Jacob's classmates, justice was never truly served. Jacob Richardson was 8 years old. He loved dinosaurs. He collected hockey cards. He had just learned to ride a bike without training wheels. And on the night of April 22, year 2006, he was murdered by his own sister because she wanted to run away with her boyfriend. Mark and Deborah Richardson devoted their lives to protecting their children, and they were repaid with brutal violence in their own home. Jasmine Richardson's case raises questions that still haunt the Canadian justice system. At what age is someone fully culpable for murder? Can a 12-year-old truly understand the finality of death? And does rehabilitation work when the crime is this extreme? There are no easy answers, but what remains undeniable is that 3 innocent lives were stolen, and the person responsible for at least one of those deaths walks free today. Jasmine walked free after 10 years. Not every teenage killer gets that chance. What time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious how many of you are watching late at night like me. Case 5. Mary Bell, year 1968. On the morning of May 25, year 1968, in the working-class neighborhood of Scotswood in Newcastle upon Tyne, England, a young boy playing near an abandoned house made a grim discovery. Inside, lying on the debris-strewn floor, was the body of 4-year-old Martin Brown. There were no visible injuries, no signs of a struggle. At first, authorities suspected a tragic accident. Perhaps the boy had fallen or gotten trapped. But an autopsy revealed he had been strangled. And within weeks, a second child would die under eerily similar circumstances, leading investigators to a suspect no one wanted to believe. An 11-year-old girl named Mary Bell. Mary Flora Bell was born on May 26, year 1957, in Newcastle, England, into circumstances that can only be described as nightmarish. Her mother, Betty Bell, worked as a prostitute and was known to be violent and unstable. Court records and later psychiatric evaluations would reveal that Betty had attempted to kill Mary multiple times during her childhood, once by forcing her to swallow pills, another time by pushing her out of a window. Mary survived, but the trauma left deep psychological scars. She grew up in extreme poverty, surrounded by violence, neglect, and sexual abuse. By the time she entered primary school, teachers noticed disturbing behavior. Mary would choke younger children on the playground, claiming she was just playing. She showed no empathy when reprimanded. She seemed, even at age 7 or 8, fundamentally disconnected from normal emotional responses. On May 25, year 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Mary Bell strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown in that abandoned house. She did it alone, her small hands around his throat, squeezing until he stopped breathing. Then she left him there and went home. No panic, no confession. She simply returned to her daily routine. When Martin's body was discovered hours later, Mary joined the crowd of neighborhood children gathered at the scene. Witnesses later recalled that she seemed unusually calm, almost curious, asking questions about what death looked like. 2 days after Martin's death, a local nursery school was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but bizarre notes were left behind. One read, "I murder so that I may come back." Another, "We did murder Martin Brown." Police treated the notes as a sick prank, children in the neighborhood playing off the tragedy. But they weren't pranks. They were confessions. On July 31, year 1968, just over 2 months after Martin's death, 3-year-old Brian Howe disappeared while playing near his home in Scotswood. His mother reported him missing that evening. A massive search began. The next day, Brian's body was found in a patch of wasteland between 2 houses. He had been strangled. But this time, the killer had gone further. Brian's body showed signs of mutilation. Scissors had been used to cut his hair, puncture his thighs, and carve an M into his stomach. The violence was escalating. Investigators began re-examining Martin Brown's death, now convinced the 2 cases were connected. They interviewed dozens of children in the neighborhood, and 2 names kept appearing: Mary Bell, age 11, and her friend Norma Bell, age 13, no relation. Witnesses reported seeing the two girls near the location where Brian's body was found. Others recalled Mary's strange behavior after Martin's death, her lack of emotion, her odd questions, her almost gleeful curiosity. When detectives brought Mary in for questioning, she was composed, articulate, and chillingly detached. She denied involvement at first, but inconsistencies in her story and matching details between her account and Norma's began to unravel the truth. Under sustained interrogation, Mary's facade cracked. She admitted being present when Brian died, but tried to shift blame to Norma. Norma, in turn, said Mary had done everything. Forensic evidence fibers, witness statements, and the killer's knowledge of details not made public pointed to Mary as the primary perpetrator. On December 5, 1968, Mary Bell and Norma Bell stood trial at Newcastle Assizes for the murders of Martin Brown and Brian Howe. The courtroom was packed. The nation watched in horror. How could an 11-year-old child be capable of such violence? Psychiatric experts testified to Mary's profoundly damaged psyche. Dr. David Westbury described her as suffering from severe emotional deprivation and psychopathic tendencies. He noted that Mary showed no remorse, no understanding of the gravity of her actions, and no ability to empathize with the victims' families. But he also emphasized that Mary herself had been a victim of abuse, neglect, and a mother who had tried to kill her. The defense argued that Mary was a product of her environment, a child failed by every adult who should have protected her. The prosecution countered that regardless of her background, Mary Bell had committed cold-blooded murder twice. She had planned, executed, and concealed her crimes. She had mutilated a toddler's body, and she had shown no signs of remorse or rehabilitation. On December 17, 1968, the jury returned its verdict. Mary Bell was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility for both Martin Brown and Brian Howe. Norma Bell was acquitted. Mary, at 11 years old, became one of the youngest convicted killers in British history. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, an indefinite sentence with no fixed release date. Mary Bell spent 12 years in juvenile detention and psychiatric facilities. During that time, she received intensive therapy, education, and psychological treatment. Reports from her caregivers noted gradual progress. She began to show signs of empathy, remorse, and an understanding of the harm she had caused. In 1980, at the age of 23, Mary Bell was released under a new identity. The terms of her release included lifelong anonymity. Her new name, location, and identifying details were protected by court order to allow her a chance at rehabilitation. As of 2025, Mary Bell is now in her late 60s. She has lived under a protected identity for over 4 decades. She has a daughter, born in 1984, who was also granted anonymity to protect her from the sins of her mother. Mary has never given interviews, never spoken publicly about the murders, and remains one of the most controversial figures in British criminal justice history. Victim advocacy groups argue that a child killer should never walk free. Child welfare experts counter that Mary herself was a victim who, through treatment, was rehabilitated. But for the families of Martin Brown and Brian Howe, there is no rehabilitation that brings their sons back. Martin was 4 years old. He loved toy cars and playing with his older brother. Brian was 3. He had just started learning his ABCs. And they were strangled by a child barely older than them. A child who had been so broken by the world that she broke others in return. Mary Bell's case forces us to confront the most uncomfortable question in criminal justice. What do we do with children who kill? Are they born evil, or are they made? Can they be fixed, or are they beyond redemption? The answers remain elusive. But what is certain is that 2 little boys lost their lives, and their families have carried that grief for over 50 years. Mary's case sparked debate about children who kill. Decades later, in America, 2 girls would shock the nation. Case 6. Cindy Collier and Shirley Wolfe, year 1983. On the afternoon of June 14, year 1983, in the quiet suburb of Auburn, California, 85-year-old Anna Brackett answered a knock at her condominium door. Standing on her porch were two teenage girls, polite, soft-spoken, asking if they could use her phone. Anna, a retired schoolteacher known for her kindness and generosity, invited them inside without hesitation. It was the last decision she would ever make. Within minutes, those two girls, 15-year-old Cindy Collier and 14-year-old Shirley Wolf, beat Anna Brackett to death with a wooden stave, stabbed her repeatedly, and left her body in a pool of blood on her living room floor. Then they rifled through her belongings, stole $300 and some jewelry, and walked out as casually as they had walked in. Cindy Collier and Shirley Wolf were runaways. Both had been placed in a group home for troubled youth in Auburn after histories of family dysfunction, truancy, and minor criminal offenses. Cindy had been in and out of foster care since age 7. Her mother was incarcerated, her father absent. Records describe her as angry, defiant, and prone to violent outbursts. Shirley's background was similar: neglect, instability, a revolving door of temporary placements. Neither girl had committed serious violent crimes before June 14, year 1983, but both had escalating behavioral issues that authorities struggled to manage. On the morning of the murder, Cindy and Shirley walked away from the group home. They had no money, no plan, and nowhere to go. They wandered through Auburn's residential neighborhoods, looking for an opportunity. When they saw Anna Brackett's modest condominium neat, quiet, an elderly woman likely living alone, they saw an easy target. They knocked. Anna answered, and what happened next was as brutal as it was senseless. Once inside, Cindy and Shirley attacked without warning. Cindy grabbed a wooden stave, a piece of decorative trim, and began beating Anna over the head. Anna, frail and elderly, had no chance to defend herself. She fell to the ground, bleeding, disoriented. Shirley then pulled out a knife and began stabbing her over and over, in the chest, the abdomen, the back. When Anna finally stopped moving, the two girls stood over her body, breathing hard, covered in blood. Then they searched the condominium. They found $300 in cash, a few pieces of inexpensive jewelry, and Anna's car keys. They took the money and jewelry, left the keys, and walked out the front door. Neighbors saw them leaving but didn't think much of it. Two girls, carrying bags, looking calm. It wasn't until hours later, when Anna's daughter stopped by for a scheduled visit and found her mother's body, that the horror was discovered. Police were called. The crime scene was processed. Blood spatter analysis, fingerprints, and witness descriptions quickly pointed to two teenage girls seen in the area. By the next morning, Cindy Collier and Shirley Wolf were in custody. During interrogation, both girls confessed. But what chilled investigators wasn't just the confession, it was the complete lack of remorse. When asked why they killed Anna Brackett, Cindy shrugged and said, "She was old anyway." Shirley added, "We needed the money." There was no expression of guilt, no understanding of the magnitude of what they'd done. To them, Anna Brackett wasn't a person, she was an obstacle, a means to $300 and a temporary escape from the group home. The Placer County District Attorney's Office moved to try both girls as adults. Under California law, juveniles could be transferred to adult court for certain violent felonies, and the DA argued that the premeditation, brutality, and lack of remorse warranted the harshest possible penalties. Defense attorneys pushed back, citing the girls' ages 14 and 15 and their troubled backgrounds. They argued that the state had failed these girls long before they failed Anna Brackett. But the evidence was overwhelming. The confessions, the forensic evidence, the cold, casual cruelty of their statements. In year 1984, both Cindy Collier and Shirley Wolf were convicted of first-degree murder. At sentencing, the judge handed down life in prison without the possibility of parole, making them the youngest females in California history to receive such a sentence at the time. Anna Brackett's family delivered tearful victim impact statements. Her daughter described a woman who had spent 40 years teaching children, volunteering at her church, baking cookies for neighbors. She opened her door to help two strangers, the daughter said, voice breaking. And they killed her for $300. $300. As of year 2025, Cindy Collier and Shirley Wolf have both spent over 40 years in prison. Cindy is incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Shirley is at the California Institution for Women in Corona. Both have been denied parole multiple times. At their hearings, parole boards cite the same factors: the extreme brutality of the crime, the lack of demonstrated remorse, and the ongoing risk to public safety. Victim advocates attend every hearing, ensuring Anna Brackett's memory is honored and her killers remain behind bars. In prison, both women have participated in educational and vocational programs. Reports indicate Cindy earned her GED and completed anger management courses. Shirley has taken college-level classes and worked in the prison library. But rehabilitation, in the eyes of the parole board, does not erase the crime. Anna Brackett was 85 years old. She survived the Great Depression, raised 3 children, taught hundreds of students, and devoted her retirement years to her church and community. And she died on her living room floor, beaten and stabbed by 2 children she tried to help. Cindy Collier and Shirley Wolf's case is often cited in debates over juvenile sentencing. Should children, even violent ones, be sentenced to die in prison? In year 2012, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Miller v. Alabama that mandatory life without parole for juveniles violates the 8th Amendment. But the ruling allowed for discretionary LWOP sentences in cases of extreme violence. Cindy and Shirley's case falls into that category. Multiple courts have upheld their sentences, and as of year 2025, there is no indication either will ever be released. Anna Brackett's family has never recovered. Her grandchildren, now adults with children of their own, carry the weight of a senseless loss. Every June 14, they visit her grave, lay flowers, and remember a woman whose generosity cost her everything. And every year, they write letters to the parole board, reminding them that $300 was the price 2 teenagers placed on their grandmother's life. What made 2 children capable of murdering a defenseless elderly woman for grocery money? I know these stories are heavy. They're meant to be. If you're still here, you understand that true crime isn't entertainment. It's education, awareness, and honoring victims' memories. If that resonates with you, share this video with someone who values deep dives over clickbait, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Let's continue. Case 7, Brenda Spencer, year 1979. On the morning of January 29, year 1979, children at Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California, arrived for another ordinary Monday. Parents dropped off students. Teachers unlocked classrooms. The playground filled with laughter and the sound of sneakers on asphalt. But across the street, in a small house with a clear view of the school, 16-year-old Brenda Spencer was waking up, loading a semi-automatic .22 caliber rifle and positioning herself at her bedroom window. At 8:30 a.m., she opened fire. The first shots struck the school's principal, Burton Ragg, as he unlocked the front gate. He fell instantly. Custodian Mike Suchar, 56, ran toward the principal to help. Brenda shot him too. Then she turned her rifle on the children. Bullets tore through the playground. Kids screamed and scattered, diving behind benches, crawling toward the building. Some were hit, 8 children wounded, 1 officer injured trying to provide cover. For 6.5 hours, Brenda Spencer held that elementary school hostage, firing sporadically from her window, reloading, and firing again. And when a reporter finally reached her by phone during the standoff and asked why she was doing this, Brenda gave an answer that would become infamous. "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." Brenda Ann Spencer was born in year 1962 inches, San Diego. Her childhood was marked by isolation and dysfunction. Her parents divorced when she was young. She lived with her father, Wallace Spencer, in a small house directly across the street from Cleveland Elementary, the same school Brenda had attended as a child. By all accounts, Wallace was emotionally distant, neglectful, and struggled with alcoholism. Brenda, shy and awkward, had few friends. She was bullied at school. She struggled academically, and by her teenage years, she had developed a fascination with guns, violence, and death. In December 1978, just weeks before the shooting, Wallace Spencer gave Brenda a Christmas gift: a Ruger 10-22 semi-automatic rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition. When asked later why he gave a rifle to a troubled 16-year-old, Wallace said Brenda had asked for a radio. He bought her a gun instead. It remains one of the most baffling and tragic parenting decisions in American crime history. On the morning of January 29, 1979, Brenda woke up, looked out her window at the children gathering for school, and decided to shoot them. There was no manifesto, no elaborate plan, no clear motive beyond a vague sense of boredom and anger. She simply loaded the rifle, aimed, and fired. Principal Burton Ragg, 53, was trying to shepherd children to safety when he was shot. Mike Suchar, the custodian, ran into the line of fire to help. Both men died at the scene. 8 children were wounded, some seriously. A police officer responding to the scene was shot in the neck but survived. SWAT teams surrounded the house. Negotiators tried to establish communication. For hours, Brenda alternated between silence and sporadic gunfire. At one point, a reporter from the San Diego Tribune called the Spencer residence, and Brenda answered. The conversation was recorded. When asked why she was shooting at children, Brenda replied flatly, "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." She later added, "I had no reason for it, and it was just a lot of fun." The reporter, stunned, asked if she felt any remorse. Brenda said, "No. It's just like shooting ducks or rabbits." By mid-afternoon, after SWAT teams threatened to storm the house, Brenda surrendered. She walked out unarmed, hands raised, and was immediately arrested. In the back of the police car, she showed no emotion, no tears, no panic. Just a blank, detached stare. The investigation revealed that Brenda had a history of psychological issues. She had been prescribed antidepressants. She had mentioned suicidal thoughts to a school counselor. She had a reputation for cruelty. Neighbors reported she used a pellet gun to shoot out windows and harm animals, but no one intervened. No one flagged her as a serious threat. And so, on a Monday morning in January 1979, 2 men died and 9 people were wounded because a 16-year-old girl was bored. Brenda Spencer's trial began in 1980. She was charged with 2 counts of murder and assault with a deadly weapon. Her defense team argued that Brenda suffered from epilepsy, depression, and possible abuse at the hands of her father. They painted her as a victim of neglect, mental illness, and a toxic home environment. But prosecutors focused on the facts: premeditation, the choice to reload and continue firing, and the callous lack of remorse. Brenda Spencer had turned a playground into a war zone. She had killed 2 men who died trying to protect children. And when asked why, she said it was fun. On April 6, 1980, Brenda Spencer pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and assault with a deadly weapon. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Her statement to the court was brief and emotionless. "I'm sorry," she said flatly. But the apology felt hollow. In interviews years later, Brenda would claim that the "I don't like Mondays" comment was a flippant remark, misunderstood and taken out of context. She said she was in a dissociative state, that she didn't fully remember the shooting, that she was abused and suicidal. But the damage was done. Those words, "I don't like Mondays," became a symbol of senseless violence, inspiring the Boomtown Rats to write a hit song of the same name in 1979. As of 2025, Brenda Spencer has been denied parole 5 times. She remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Corona. At each parole hearing, victims' families and community members speak out, urging the board to keep her behind bars. Burton Ragg's widow described him as a devoted educator who gave his life protecting children. Mike Suchar's family spoke of a man who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. Survivors of the shooting, now adults with children of their own, have testified to lasting trauma, nightmares, and the permanent loss of innocence. Brenda's next parole hearing is scheduled for 2025, She is now in her early 60s. Prison records indicate she has completed anger management courses, earned her GED, and participated in psychological treatment. But the question remains, can someone who opened fire on a playground full of children ever truly be rehabilitated? Can remorse expressed decades later erase the horror of that January morning? Burton Ragg was 53 years old. He loved his job. He spent every day ensuring children felt safe and supported. And he died on school grounds, shot while trying to protect them. Mike Suchar was 56. He was weeks away from retirement. He had grandchildren he adored, and he ran into gunfire because that's the kind of man he was. 8 children were wounded. Some still carry the bullets in their bodies. And all because a 16-year-old girl didn't like Mondays. Brenda Spencer's case is considered one of the first modern school shootings in America. It established a horrifying template that would be repeated in the decades to come. Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland. Each time, the same question arises. How do we stop this? And each time, the answer remains frustratingly elusive. Brenda's violence was public and shocking. But some teenage killers operate in private, hidden behind family walls. What's the weather like where you are right now? Sunny? Rainy? Snowing? Let me know. I find it fascinating, imagining where you all are tuning in from. Case 8. Holly Harvey and Sandra Ketchum, year 2004. On the evening of August 2, year 2004, in the suburban community of Fayetteville, Georgia, a worried neighbor called the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. She hadn't seen Carl and Sarah Collier in over a day, and their cars were still in the driveway. When deputies arrived at the modest ranch-style home and knocked, there was no answer. They forced entry. What they found in the basement was a scene of unspeakable brutality. 73-year-old Carl Collier lay in a pool of blood, stabbed more than 20 times. Nearby, his 74-year-old wife Sarah had suffered the same fate over 20 stab wounds. Defensive wounds on her hands, showing she had fought desperately for her life. And their 15-year-old granddaughter, Holly Harvey, whom they had raised since infancy, was missing. So was Holly's 16-year-old girlfriend, Sandra Ketchum. Holly Harvey's life had been defined by instability long before that August night. Born in year 1989 to parents deep in the throes of drug addiction, Holly was removed from their custody when she was just a toddler. Her grandparents, Carl and Sarah Collier, stepped in. They raised her as their own, providing stability, structure, and unconditional love in a home where rules were clear and discipline was consistent. For years, Holly seemed to thrive. But when adolescence hit, everything changed. By age 14, Holly was rebellious, angry, and increasingly defiant. She began experimenting with drugs and alcohol. She skipped school. She lied constantly. And in early year 2004, she met Sandra Ketchum, a 16-year-old with a similar troubled background. The two girls quickly became inseparable, and then something more. Holly came out to her grandparents, telling them she and Sandra were in a romantic relationship. Carl and Sarah, conservative Christians who attended church every Sunday, struggled to accept it. They didn't disown Holly, but they made it clear they disapproved. They forbade Sandra from staying overnight. They monitored Holly's phone. They set stricter curfews. Holly felt suffocated. To her, Carl and Sarah weren't protectors, they were jailers. And in the summer of year 2004, Holly and Sandra began talking about a permanent solution. Text messages and journal entries recovered later revealed the disturbing evolution of their plan. At first, it was fantasy. What if we just ran away? Then, it became more concrete. We need money. We need a car. And finally, it became explicit. We have to kill them. On the night of August 2, year 2004, Holly and Sandra armed themselves with kitchen knives. They had written a checklist on Holly's arm in ballpoint pen. Kill, keys, money, jewelry. It was a to-do list for murder. Carl and Sarah were in the basement watching television when the girls attacked. Holly struck first, stabbing her grandfather in the back. Carl, shocked and bleeding, tried to fight back, but Sandra joined in. The two girls stabbed him over and over in the chest, the abdomen, the neck. Sarah screamed and tried to intervene. Holly turned on her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, who had sacrificed everything to give her a stable home. She stabbed Sarah repeatedly, ignoring her grandmother's pleas, ignoring the blood, ignoring everything except the plan. When it was over, Carl and Sarah Collier lay dead in their basement. Holly and Sandra, covered in blood, went upstairs. They showered. They changed clothes. They searched the house for cash and found about $200. They took Carl's truck keys, and then they drove away, heading toward the coast, convinced they would start a new life together. For 2 days, Holly Harvey and Sandra Ketchum were on the run. They drove to Tybee Island, a beach town near Savannah, Georgia, where they planned to disappear. But on August 4, year 2004, a routine traffic stop ended their brief taste of freedom. A Georgia State Patrol trooper pulled them over for a broken taillight. When he ran the plates, the truck came back as belonging to a homicide victim. Holly and Sandra were arrested on the spot. During questioning, investigators noticed the faded ink on Holly's arm. Kill, keys, money, jewelry. When confronted, both girls confessed. The trials were swift. The evidence was overwhelming: confessions, forensic evidence, the checklist written on Holly's arm, photographed by police. The Fayette County District Attorney's Office initially considered seeking the death penalty, but both girls were minors. Under Georgia law, they could be tried as adults, but executing them was prohibited. Instead, the DA offered plea deals to avoid lengthy trials and spare the Collier family further trauma. In year 2005, Holly Harvey pleaded guilty to 2 counts of malice murder. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. Sandra Ketchum also pleaded guilty and received 3 life sentences due to additional charges. During sentencing, members of the Collier family delivered victim impact statements that left the courtroom in tears. Carl's brother described a man who had worked 2 jobs to provide for his family, who had taken in a troubled granddaughter without hesitation, who had never given up on Holly despite her struggles. Sarah's sister spoke of a woman who baked cookies for church fundraisers, who volunteered at the local food bank, who loved her granddaughter fiercely even when that love wasn't returned. They didn't deserve this, she said, voice shaking. They gave Holly everything, and she thanked them by stabbing them to death in their own home. Holly, seated at the defense table, cried during the statements. Sandra remained stoic. The judge, before imposing sentence, addressed both girls directly. You planned this. You wrote a checklist. You carried it out with cold precision. And you did it to 2 elderly people whose only crime was loving you and trying to keep you safe. As of year 2025, Holly Harvey is incarcerated at Pulaski State Prison in Georgia. She will be eligible for parole in year 2044 when she is 55 years old. Sandra Ketchum is housed at Metro State Prison. Her earliest parole date is year 2039. Both have been denied parole at every hearing. Family members of Carl and Sarah Collier attend each hearing, holding photos of the couple, ensuring the parole board remembers who the real victims are. In prison, Holly has reportedly expressed remorse. She has participated in therapy, earned her GED, and written letters of apology to her extended family letters that have largely gone unanswered. Sandra has remained less communicative, completing vocational programs but rarely speaking about the murders. Psychologists who have evaluated both women note the toxic dynamic of their relationship, a folie à deux, a shared psychosis in which each girl reinforced the other's worst impulses until murder seemed not just possible, but necessary. Carl and Sarah Collier were in their 70s. They had raised children, celebrated anniversaries, built a life together, and when their son and daughter-in-law fell into addiction, they didn't hesitate. They took in Holly, their granddaughter, and loved her as their own. They attended her school plays. They took her to church. They set boundaries because they wanted her to succeed. And on August 2, year 2004, Holly repaid that love with a knife, stabbing them over 20 times each while they begged for mercy. How does love turn to murder? How do grandparents become targets? Case 9, Carol Ann Fugate, year 1958. On the morning of January 21, year 1958, in Lincoln, Nebraska, 19-year-old Charles Starkweather walked into the modest home of his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate. He carried a rifle. Within minutes, Carol's mother, Velda Bartlett, age 36, lay dead, shot in the head. Her stepfather, Marion Bartlett, age 57, was beaten with the rifle butt, then shot. And Carol's 2-year-old half-sister, Betty Jean, was stabbed to death and stuffed in a cardboard box. What happened next remains one of the most debated and controversial crime sprees in American history. For 8 days, Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate tore across Nebraska and Wyoming, leaving 11 bodies in their wake. But the question that still haunts investigators, journalists, and true crime scholars is this: was Carol a willing accomplice, or was she a terrified hostage? Carol Ann Fugate was born in year 1943 inches, Lincoln, Nebraska. Her childhood was marked by poverty and instability. Her biological father left when she was young. Her mother remarried Marion Bartlett, a man Carol openly resented. By age 13, Carol was a rebellious, angry teenager who felt misunderstood and trapped in a life she didn't want. Enter Charles Starkweather, a high school dropout, garbage collector, and petty criminal who fancied himself a James Dean rebel. He was 19, Carol was 14, and despite the age gap and her parents' strong objections, the two began a relationship. Charles was violent, volatile, and obsessed with Carol. He talked constantly about leaving Lincoln, starting a new life, making a name for himself. Carol, isolated and desperate for attention, found his intensity intoxicating. Her parents, alarmed by Charles's influence, tried to end the relationship. They forbade Carol from seeing him. They threatened to call the police. And on January 21, year 1958, Charles decided to remove the obstacles. After murdering Carol's family, Charles and Carol remained in the Bartlett home for nearly a week. They posted a sign on the door: "Stay away. Everybody is sick with the flu." When relatives and friends stopped by, Carol, by her own later admission, turned them away, claiming her family didn't want visitors. During this time, Charles and Carol ate food from the refrigerator, watched television, and slept in the house while 3 bodies decomposed in the outbuildings. When authorities finally forced entry on January 27, year 1958, they found the horrific scene. Charles and Carol were gone. What followed was one of the most infamous crime sprees in American history. Over the next 8 days, Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate killed 8 more people. Their victims included 70-year-old farmer August Meyer, shot and killed in his home. Teenagers Robert Jensen, 17, and Carol King, 16, were abducted, driven to a remote area, and shot execution-style. Businessman C. Lauer Ward, his wife Clara, and their housekeeper Lillian Fenkel were murdered in their Lincoln home, stabbed, shot, and mutilated. The violence escalated with each crime, becoming more frenzied, more brutal. Law enforcement agencies across Nebraska and Wyoming mobilized. Roadblocks were set up. The National Guard was called in. Media coverage was relentless. Newspapers published photos of Charles and Carol, labeling them the Badlands Killers. The nation watched in horror as 2 teenagers left a trail of bodies across the Midwest. On January 29, year 1958, a high-speed chase ended with Charles Starkweather's arrest near Douglas, Wyoming. Carol was found in the car, unharmed. Immediately, the narratives diverged. Charles claimed Carol was a willing participant. She had encouraged him, helped him, even laughed after some of the killings. Carol claimed she was a hostage. Charles had murdered her family, threatened to kill her if she didn't comply, and forced her to go along with everything. The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in between. Charles Starkweather was tried first. In year 1958, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He was executed in the electric chair on June 25, year 1959. Before his execution, Charles gave multiple interviews in which he alternated between blaming Carol and absolving her, making it impossible to discern the truth. Carol Ann Fugate's trial began in October year 1958. she was charged with first-degree murder in the death of Robert Jensen. The prosecution argued that Carol was a willing accomplice. She had opportunities to escape. She lied to relatives at the door. She showed no signs of being held against her will. Witnesses testified that they saw Carol laughing and joking with Charles during the spree. The defense countered that Carol was a 14-year-old girl, terrified and manipulated by a violent older boyfriend who had just murdered her entire family. They argued she had no choice but to comply. The jury convicted Carol Ann Fugate of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, the youngest female ever sentenced to life in Nebraska at the time. The verdict was controversial. Many believed Carol was a victim. Others believed she was a cold-blooded killer who used her age and gender to escape the death penalty. Carol served 18 years in prison. During that time, she maintained her innocence, insisting she had been a hostage. In year 1976, after multiple parole hearings and a groundswell of public support from those who believed her story, Carol Ann Fugate was paroled. She was released under a new identity and has lived a quiet, private life ever since. As of year 2025, Carol is in her early 80s. She has never given a full public account of those 8 days in January year 1958. The victims of the Starkweather-Fugate spree were ordinary people living ordinary lives. Robert Jensen and Carol King were high school sweethearts on their first date. They were ambushed, forced into a storm cellar, and shot in the head. Carol was sexually assaulted before she was killed. August Meyer was a retired farmer who had known Charles as a child. C. Lauer Ward and his wife Clara were wealthy, philanthropic, beloved in their community. Lillian Fenkel was a 51-year-old housekeeper, just trying to earn a living. And Velda Bartlett, Marion Bartlett, and 2-year-old Betty Jean Bartlett were a family destroyed because a mother tried to protect her daughter from a dangerous boyfriend. The Starkweather-Fugate case inspired countless books, films, and debates. Terrence Malick's year 1973 film Badlands is loosely based on the spree. Bruce Springsteen's song, Nebraska, references Charles Starkweather, and the question remains, was Carol Ann Fugate a victim or a villain? Carol claimed she was a victim, but our next case leaves no room for such doubt. Case 10. Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham, year 2016. On the morning of April 15, year 2016, police in Spalding, England, received a distressed call from a 14-year-old girl. "I think my mum and sister are dead," she said calmly. Officers arrived at a modest terraced house on Dawson Avenue within minutes. Inside, they found a scene that defied comprehension. In an upstairs bedroom, 49-year-old Elizabeth Edwards lay in her bed, stabbed to death. In another room, her 13-year-old daughter Katie had suffered the same fate, multiple stab wounds, blood soaking through the bedding. Both had been killed while they slept. And downstairs, in the living room, the caller, 14-year-old Kim Edwards, Elizabeth's other daughter, sat on the couch with her 14-year-old boyfriend, Lucas Markham. They were watching the vampire film, Twilight. Empty pizza boxes and ice cream containers littered the coffee table. They had been in the house with the bodies for 36 hours. Kim Edwards had lived her entire life in Spalding, a small market town in Lincolnshire. Her childhood, by outward appearances, seemed stable. Her mother, Elizabeth, worked as a teaching assistant. Her younger sister Katie was a bright, bubbly girl who loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. But beneath the surface, Kim harbored deep resentment. She felt her mother favored Katie. She felt controlled, stifled, misunderstood. And when she began dating Lucas Markham, a quiet, isolated boy from a troubled home, she found someone who would do anything for her. Lucas Markham was 14 years old, small for his age, and desperate for acceptance. He had been bullied relentlessly at school. His home life was chaotic. His parents had separated, and he spent most of his time alone, immersed in violent video games and dark online forums. When he met Kim, she became his entire world. She was his first girlfriend, his only friend, the center of his universe. And when Kim began talking about hating her mother and sister, Lucas listened. When she said she wished they were dead, Lucas didn't dismiss it as teenage angst. He offered to help. In the weeks leading up to April 13, year 2016, Kim and Lucas planned the murders. They discussed methods. Knives would be quieter than other weapons. They discussed timing a sleepover, when everyone would be asleep and vulnerable. They discussed what they would do afterward: have sex, eat food, watch movies, enjoy their freedom. This wasn't a crime of passion or a sudden loss of control. This was premeditated, discussed, and executed with chilling precision. On the night of April 13, year 2016, Lucas came over for what Elizabeth believed was a supervised sleepover. Kim's mother went to bed around 10 p.m. Katie was already asleep. Lucas and Kim waited until after midnight, ensuring everyone was deeply asleep. Then Lucas took a kitchen knife and went upstairs. He entered Elizabeth's room first. She woke as he approached, but before she could scream, Lucas began stabbing her over and over, in the chest, the neck, the face. Elizabeth fought, but Lucas was relentless. When she finally stopped moving, Lucas left her bedroom and went to Katie's room. The 13-year-old never woke up. Lucas stabbed her multiple times while she slept, ensuring she wouldn't survive to identify him. Kim waited downstairs during the murders. When Lucas came down, covered in blood, Kim helped him clean up. They took showers, they changed clothes, and then, for 36 hours, they lived in the house as if nothing had happened. They ordered pizza. They watched movies. They had sex in Kim's bedroom, just feet away from where her mother and sister lay dead. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. No one heard screams. And when Kim finally called 911 on the morning of April 15, year 2016, her tone was flat, almost bored. During police interrogation, both Kim and Lucas confessed quickly. There was no point denying it. The evidence was overwhelming. But what shocked investigators was the complete lack of remorse. Kim showed no emotion when discussing her mother and sister's deaths. Lucas, when asked why he did it, simply said, "Because Kim wanted me to." Psychiatric evaluations diagnosed the pair with a shared psychotic disorder, folie à deux, in which Kim's resentment and Lucas's desperation fed off each other, creating a toxic partnership that culminated in double murder. The trial began in November year 2016 at Nottingham Crown Court. Both Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder. The prosecution described the crime as chilling in its callousness. 2 teenagers who murdered a mother and daughter in their sleep, then spent a day and a half eating ice cream and watching movies. The defense argued that both were children, mentally ill, manipulated by each other. But the judge, Justice Haddon Cave, was unequivocal in his condemnation. On January 27, year 2017, Kim Edwards was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. Lucas Markham received life with a minimum of 17 years. They were among the youngest people in the United Kingdom ever convicted of double murder. At sentencing, Elizabeth Edwards' sister delivered a victim impact statement, describing a woman who had devoted her life to her daughters, who had worked tirelessly to provide for them, who had loved them unconditionally. Katie was just 13 years old, she said through tears. She had her whole life ahead of her, and Kim took that away because she was jealous. As of year 2025, Kim Edwards is incarcerated at a secure facility for young offenders in England. She will be eligible for parole in year 2036, when she is 34 years old. Lucas Markham is housed separately and will be eligible for parole in year 2033. Both have participated in intensive psychiatric treatment. Reports indicate some progress, but psychologists remain divided on whether either will ever be safe for release. Elizabeth Edwards was 49 years old. She worked with special needs children, bringing patience and kindness to students others had given up on. She loved gardening, baking, and Sunday roasts with her daughters. Katie Edwards was 13. She wanted to be a vet. She volunteered at an animal shelter every weekend. She had just been accepted into a gifted and talented program at school. And on the night of April 13, year 2016, both were murdered in their beds by the people who should have loved and protected them. The case of Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham raises the same questions that haunt every case in this video. How do children become capable of such evil? Is it nature, nurture, or some toxic combination of both? Can they be rehabilitated, or are they beyond redemption? And how do we, as a society, prevent the next Kim, the next Lucas, the next tragedy? How do we reconcile the capacity for evil with the face of a child? 10 cases, 10 teenage girls, dozens of victims, mothers, fathers, grandparents, siblings, children, strangers. 83 years spanning from year 1968 to year 2025. Different countries, different circumstances, different motives, but one constant: the unthinkable capacity for violence in people who, by age alone, should represent innocence. Megan Boswell, who wrapped her daughter in foil and hid her in a shed. Alyssa Bustamante, who wrote "It was amazing" in her diary. Rachel and Shelia, who counted to 3 and stabbed their best friend. Jasmine Richardson, who killed her own brother to run away with her boyfriend. Mary Bell, who strangled toddlers at age 11. Cindy and Shirley, who murdered an elderly woman for $300. Brenda Spencer, who shot at children because she didn't like Mondays. Holly and Sandra, who wrote a murder checklist on an arm. Caril Ann Fugate, whose guilt or innocence remains debated over 60 years later. And Kim and Lucas, who spent 36 hours watching movies while bodies lay upstairs. If you've watched until the end, you're part of a community that believes in remembering victims, understanding the psychology behind these horrors, and demanding justice. These aren't just stories, they're warnings. They're reminders that evil has no age limit, that warning signs exist, and that intervention can save lives. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. This channel will keep bringing you deep, respectful, well-researched true crime that honors victims and seeks truth. Drop a comment. Which case shocked you most? Did you learn something you didn't know before? And if this video gave you value, share it with someone who appreciates real journalism over sensationalism. As of year 2025, these 10 cases remind us the justice system struggles with how to punish children who commit adult crimes. Victims' families carry grief that never fully heals. And society must ask itself, are we doing enough to protect the innocent and intervene before tragedy strikes? Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.